It was a train of terror, thundering into a curve at 106 miles an hour, double the speed limit, just before it flew off the rails. Several people were killed, more than 200 injured.
Investigators are learning more about the deadly crash and the man behind the controls of the Amtrak train. Caitlin Burke has the story.
The investigation into the cause of the Amtrak crash continues today, even as much of the debris from the accident has been cleared away.
NTSB officials recovered the train's event recorder, preliminary information showing it was going much too fast just before it derailed.
The speed limit on that curve is just 50 miles per hour. The train started around it at 106 miles an hour. The engineer tried to slow the train, slamming on the emergency brake, but it was too little, too late.
In the next 3 or 4 seconds, the speed of the train had only decreased to 102.
Why exactly the train was going so fast will be the biggest question facing investigators. The man behind the controls of the Amtrak has been identified as 32-year-old Brandon Bostian. According to his attorney, he has no recollection of the crash or anything unusual happening, but he's cooperating with police and has submitted a blood sample. Bostian was treated for a concussion and injuries to his legs. Today, at least 7 people are confirmed dead, and some are still missing.
His life may have been snuffed out, and my grandchildren are brokenhearted, and I'm cried out.
Police are widening the search area around the crash site today in hopes of finding missing passengers who may have been thrown from the train.
The Amtrak crash quickly became a political issue in Washington, where the House Appropriations Committee moved forward with a $250 million cut from last year's Amtrak funding. Democrats fought to increase funds for the shrunken transportation budget, but Republicans rejected the idea. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
You have to ask the Vatican, what are you thinking? There's a corrupt organization, nobody knows who's in charge, and yet controlled in many parts in Gaza by Hamas, a terrorist organization, and yet the Vatican now has officially recognized what they call the State of Palestine over the opposition of Israel and the United States of America. Ephraim Graham has that story from the CBN newsroom. Here's Ephraim.
Pat, the Vatican made the official recognition of the State of Palestine in a new treaty. That treaty covers activities of the Roman Catholic Church in Palestinian areas. Palestinian leaders say it gives them a big legal victory over Israel in their quest to create a Palestinian state.
So this designates Palestine as a state having borders, 67 borders, having a capital, Jerusalem, and of course having rights in accordance with international law.
Both the U.S. and Israel oppose the Vatican's move. They say it undermines the attempt to negotiate a deal between Israel and the Palestinians on the terms of Palestinian statehood. We'll have more on this story on tomorrow's 700 Club. Pat?
Muddle-headed religiosity. You find it all the time. People who claim to be religious, they don't get their facts straight, they don't know what's on the ground, and they're led by kind of a left-wing ideology. I didn't think that was the case in the Catholic Church. They've been very reasonable on so many issues. But you hear Aaron Showery saying, with a capital in Jerusalem. Did you hear that? That is the eternal capital of Israel, won by King David. King David was not a, quote, Palestinian. Whew. Ephraim.
Pat, here at home, House Speaker John Boehner called a new measure, quote, the most pro-life legislation ever to come before this body. Boehner was talking about a ban on abortions after the 5th month of pregnancy, just minutes before the House approved that ban. Paul Strand brings us that story from Capitol Hill.
A ban on aborting unborn babies older than 20 weeks, old enough to feel pain, has passed its first hurdle.
The yeas are 242, the nays are 184.
The U.S. House has passed the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, with almost every Republican voting yay and almost every Democrat voting nay.
Democrats and Republicans took up familiar positions for such a debate. Democrats saying they had to protect America's women and their right to make their own medical choices, and Republicans saying they had to protect the most unprotected of classes, America's unborn children.
We have given these little babies less legal protection from unnecessary cruelty than the protection we have given farm animals under the Federal Humane Slaughter Act.
Now, I remember the days of back alley abortions. Many women died and more were permanently injured before Roe versus Wade. With this egregious bill, Republicans have once again decided to take us back there.
A Democrat who's a doctor says physicians and their pregnant patients should decide what's best, not Congress.
That is sacred to the oath that I swore when I became a doctor. This bill will make it criminal for me to do my job as a doctor.
But a Republican who was also in medicine shot back.
I practiced OB anesthesia for over 20 years. I was always amazed that in the labor and delivery suite, we would deliver 21-week post-fertilization babies, and down the corridor, you would abort them.
Republicans said the public and right is on their side.
60% of Americans, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, support the Pain Capable Act.
We have a moral obligation in this country to protect life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is time that we do our job.
But House passage was the easiest hurdle for this abortion ban becoming law.
It now faces an uncertain future in the Senate and an almost certain presidential veto. Paul Strand, CBN News, Capitol Hill.
And Pat, this is one to continue to watch.
It's amazing that they're lining up. The Democrats are lining up as a culture of death. The Republicans lining up as a culture of life. The Democrats are going over on the deep side on so many issues, not just in relation to this, but many other issues that are so appalling to most of the American people. The Democrats are solidly for it, and it's just amazing how these votes are coming down. Well, ladies and gentlemen, in the country, I think the number is probably close to 55 million. We have slaughtered unborn babies. What would they have meant in this country? What would they have brought us in creativity and their addition to our body politic? They would have meant so much to us, and yet their lives are gone. And when are we going to recognize that God loves people? He says in Jeremiah, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and I appointed you a prophet to the nations." Jeremiah, he said, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you." And we're going to take something that God has formed, and we're going to allow people to kill it, and then we talk about back alley abortions and all that. This is nonsense. I mean, we're talking only about fetal viability, not some back alley abortion. Ephraim?
Pat, the House also voted to end the U.S. intelligence agency's bulk collection of Americans' phone records. It passed the USA Freedom Act Wednesday. The bill would replace bulk collection with a system to search the data held by telephone companies on a case-by-case basis. Now the Senate will consider passing the measure as well. Some senators want to continue the program, even though the House is opposed. The senators say it is a necessary measure for security against possible terrorist attacks. President Obama is kicking off his summit with Arab leaders, even though only 2 heads of state accepted his invitation. Others, including the King of Saudi Arabia, are skipping the meeting. Saudi Arabia announced Sunday he wasn't coming just 2 days after the White House said he was. Arab states are deeply skeptical of the president's plan for a nuclear deal with Iran. Arab countries are very worried about what could happen if Iran builds nuclear weapons. Saudi Arabia and other smaller states are now promising to match whatever nuclear enrichment capability Iran is allowed to keep under the president's deal. Pat?
Exactly what people said. This will kick off a nuclear arms race in the Middle East, and who knows what it'll lead to. It was a muddle-headed agreement where the president is caving on every single thing the Iranians wanted, coming up with an outrageous deal, and the Iranians are laughing at him for being so flexible, being so spineless in these negotiations. The sanctions go down. They get billions and billions of dollars in trade. He'll be able to manipulate the oil business. I mean, it's just unbelievable what this is doing. And the Saudis said, you know, we've got plenty of money and we're going to start building nuclear facilities. Well, who wants those Gulf states pitching nukes back and forth against each other? I mean, it's just gassy to contemplate it, and we are facilitating it. It's amazing. It's a complete slap at the president. I mean, when these guys said, we'll come, and then they say, no way, we're not going to lend support to the stuff you're doing, The Arabs know better. And it's time now for intelligent foreign policy in America to put together a coalition of the willing and stand up against Iran, which is obviously the biggest sponsor of terror on the globe.